Hey guys, this is Nephis here, and today I'm going to be going over what some of you, well, a lot of you actually requested for me to do, and that's a standard blue CP allocation for tanks in ESO. And there was primarily just one or two reasons I didn't want to do some sort of standard blue CP, just like I did, CP allocations for each and every trial and arena that you can see in my Discord, and also recently for DPS and healer blue CP as of the Dragonhold patch. The primary reason is that the blue CP in comparison to the healer or DPS roles for a tank is the least important, almost like not even really relevant to tanking in comparison to green and red trees. That's not to say it isn't important, but it's just not really something I would personally try to optimize if I'm just on the tank setup. Now, before we go over the first setup here, I want to emphasize that it's very minimal differences between what you can do and what you can do. Strikes or Thaumaturge, that's like literally no difference between what's here almost, but in a way there is. I'll try to explain that a little better. But there are three different possible setups for a tank in terms of blue CP, but in this video I'll be showing you guys two that you can get away with in every single piece of content, no matter what trial, no matter what dungeon, no matter what arena. I had this in mind, just like I do for a couple other setups. But yeah, this will be the standard blue CP you'll be using as a tank in ESO. So the first setup you would do as a tank in ESO, if you're not actually tanking, and this applies primarily to Offtank DPS in trials. If you're the Offtank and you've been selected to, DPS, because there are a lot of boss fights where the Offtank can get away with just the DPS setup, you would literally just put DPS blue CP in. You would have no different blue CP compared to whatever blue CP, Stam DK DPS, or whatever class you're using, Stam Blade DPS CP you're using, and just because you just want to do the most damage as possible. And a lot of people ask me, well, can you still tank with the DPS blue CP? Absolutely, you can still tank with the DPS blue CP in the later parts of a trial after you swap from a DPS setup to a tanking setup. I get a lot of questions about that, so I just thought I'd get that out of the way. So the first setup we want to look at here in terms of the first standard blue CP setup is this. So 64 in the Blessed, 56 in the Elfborn, and we do get a total of 120 points in here. Now, you don't really need 120 points into the Apprentice. What we want to primarily look at as tanks is, first, the base perks we can put our points into, and then what kind of perks we get after we put points into these trees. So the 64 Blessed, it's just the basic 10% healing done. You can be lower, like at 10%. Not much difference, to be honest, between 64 and 43. So this is primarily for, and this CP point does affect the healing done to yourself and to others, like Vigor, Dragon Blood, Hungry Scythe on the Necro, the Nightblade Cloak for tanks that heals you for percentage of your max health. This affects pretty much every heal you can imagine. This Elfborn also does affect certain healing abilities as well, like Dragon Blood, Hungry Scythe, and so forth. So these two are primarily the most important ones. And again, you don't really need spell erosion. You're not really getting that DPS or need spell erosion. So or elemental expert. Really, you really don't need either of these two for a tank. And we do get these perks here, and again, you don't really need 120 points into it. You don't really need Arcane Well. The 75 points into Foresight is pretty good too, actually. When you drink a potion, the cost of your next magic ability used within 7 seconds is reduced by 80%. Vengeance, when you block 3 spells within 10 seconds of each other, your next magic ability used within 5 seconds will always be a critical strike. So imagine you block 3 spell projectiles or spell damage based attacks as a tank, and then basically the next heal or ability you use that's magic cost will always be a crit strike, and it's pretty important if you want to crit on your heals. But other than that, that's pretty much it for the Apprentice. That's what I would do for a standard CP for a tank. And here we do have Retaliation Repost. Now, we want to keep jump points in mind. For those of you who don't know what jump points are, it's certain points at which certain, however many points you put in, doesn't actually scale to. So, like 0.7% would actually not be 1%. So 1.4% essentially is 1%, if that makes any sense. It rounds down and rounds up. And obviously you want to keep that in mind. So Retaliation, when you block a heavy attack, your next line attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% attack additional damage. Not really a big deal for a tanking setup. I mean, it's not like we're DPSing 90k here. But Repost is really the main perk we're looking for here. And I'll get into Tactician in a bit. But when you block a melee attack, you have a 15% chance to deal X amount of physical damage to the enemy. Occurs once every 5 seconds. Repost is actually basically a free damage. So as a tank, if you see anything that gives you remotely some free damage at really no cost, then just take it. And Repost also does work. At the moment, I believe it's bugged as well on ranged enemies, which is pretty weird. But just keep that in mind. Free damage, why not? We have Butcher, again, not really a big deal. I mean, again, free damage if you really want to put 75 points into the Atronach tree. Now, Tactician, when you use roll dodge to dodge an attack, you set the enemy off balance. Now, this is one of the... This will be discussed in the second setup, but this is a pretty interesting CP perk, and a lot of tanks actually do try to spend 120 points of the Atro tree for specific fights, like St. Olms and sometimes Sanctorium Hard Mode and so forth, where you can dodge roll to proc off balance manually instead of depending on Lightning Wall and Concuss and so forth. And for the rest of the CP, we do have 56 Thaumaturge, 61 Precise Strikes, and 3 Piercing. Now, we have to keep in mind something in regards to Precise Strikes. Precise Strikes does affect your healing output with Resolving or Echoing Vigor, because it's a stam-based heal, and also affected by Precise Strikes, unless they changed it recently. But that's primarily the reason why you guys may see a lot of tanks run Precise Strikes if they're running Vigor in PvE content. Otherwise, again, the Ritual tree doesn't really seem like a big deal for tanks in terms of the base CP points we can put in. We have Thaumaturge, which gives us, again, free damage in terms of putting our... let's say if you're DK, Noxious Breath, or even if you're like a tank with a Lightning Staff, this does affect your Wall of Elements with the Lightning Staff. Otherwise, Mighty Piercing, not really impressive. But we do want 120 points into the Ritual tree, and this is because in addition to getting everything else here, like increases your damages against off-balance enemies, which is whatever. Weapon crit is actually the weapon crit increase is actually pretty nice for Vigor, again. And the Opportunist, it's whatever, just like Retaliation, but still whatever free damage. But the Last Stand is going to be your main focus here as a PvE tank. When you fall below 20% health, you gain Major Heroism, granting 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 8 seconds. And this has saved my life a lot as a tank, especially as a Dragon Knight tank, when you get resources back from casting ultimate. And it can proc every 20 seconds, so that's actually not a very long time in terms of a boss fight or a heavy ad fight, depending on your group's DPS. So I would highly recommend getting a Last Stand. Major Heroism is a pretty insane buff to yourself when you need it. And in terms of the CP, I mean, again, even if I put like 40 points in Thaumaturge or 56, doesn't really matter as long as you get the gist of it. That Precise Strikes is going to be your main thing if you're using Vigor, and Thaumaturge for free damage on your wall. The second CP setup is going to be pretty specific to certain fights. That's kind of why I'm reluctant to call it a universal blue CP for tanks, because it can depend on the fight. But if you really want to use this perk right here, Tactician, for certain fights where you want to manually proc off balance with dodge rolling successfully an attack, then this is going to be pretty much it. You still kind of want the Last Stand perk, unless you feel like you'll be fine without it. Then you can obviously invest more points from here, instead of devoting most of the points from here to here, as we last saw. 27 Blessed 3 Elfborn. So again, this is kind of for fights where you can trust a healer sometimes. But otherwise, again, for a tank, the difference between 27 into Blessed and 10% Blessed or whatever, not really big. So you again, as I said earlier, blue CP is not really the most important or even sometimes the most relevant CP, but you guys get the idea. You can devote equally, half from here, or whatever. It doesn't really matter how you cut it, as long as you want, or as long as you get the perks you want, like Last Stand and the Tactician. 54 Physical Weapon Expert, 66 Master at Arms, and you're still kind of respecting some sort of jump points. But again, you sort of really don't need to pay attention to the jump points either as a tank. It's just how much difference I don't see when I'm trying out different blue CP setups. Sometimes I tank perfectly fine with shitty blue CP setups and with this blue CP setup. If you guys want to look at this blue CP, you can check it out on my website where all the other blue CP is. The link will be down in the description below. I also put this CP down in my Discord server as well if you guys want to come by and look at it whenever, along with the other CP allocations. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions about this, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll get back to you when I can. Have a safe day and a happy day.